Today, we are going to continue on with our study of the book of Shoftim or the book of Judges. If you have your Bibles, if you will turn them to Shoftim or the book of Judges, chapter 15, that is where we will begin our discussion this morning. When the anger he experienced by the betrayal of his wife had subsided, Samson returned to his wife only to find that she had been betrothed to another man. Her father explained that when Samson had departed from his wife in anger, he assumed that Samson no longer desired her, and so he offered her to another. When her father offered Samson another of his daughters to be his wife, Samson became angry. Since they provoked him with this wrong, Samson felt justified as a judge in Israel to hold the Philistines accountable for all they had done to Israel. So, if you were here with us last week, we said that Samson had gone to Timnah. He had gone to the Philistine city of Timnah. And there he cast his eyes upon a Philistine woman who was beautiful, shapely, and he desired her. And so he went back to his parents and he said, "Get this woman for me, arrange a marriage for me with her." When they found out that she was a Philistine woman, they tried to discourage him. Why can't you find a wife among your own people? Why do you got to go and get a spouse from among the uncircumcised Philistines? And he kept on. He said, "I desire her, work out an arrangement for me to marry her." And so we see, as we talked about also, that he is going from time to time to visit this woman. So he's on his way to Timnah to visit her, and out jumps a male lion. A male lion jumps out and attacks him. He's at the vineyards of Timnah. Out comes this lion and attacks him. And the Spirit of God comes upon him, and that he is able to tear apart this lion. He is able to kill him. On another occasion, he's on his way to see her, and he says, "I think I'll step aside and see what happened to the carcass of this lion." So he's on his way to see her, but he steps aside, and that he goes and he finds the carcass of the lion. What he sees is that there are bees and honey that is in the carcass of this lion. And so he reaches in to the carcass of the lion, and that he takes of the honey and he eats of it. And then later on, when he comes to his parents, he gives some of this honey to them. Now, we know he goes down to Timnah and there is a feast. Some say it is a feast for his betrothal to this woman, for them to be man and wife. And so, when he gets there, they give him 30 attendants, 30 men who will take care of his needs as well as the needs of those who are there for this feast. And so what happens is that in ancient days, that one of the major parts of any feast or special occasion were riddles. And so he's going to tell a riddle to these attendants. And it's going to be based on his experience. And so he says to them, what I'm going to do is if you can explain the riddle and give me the answer, I'll give you 30 linen garments and 30 regular garments. However, if you cannot tell me the riddle, then you owe me 30 linen garments and 30 regular garments. And so what happens is that he tells them the riddle. As we see here, it says, out of the eater something to eat, out of the strong something sweet. And so they take this, and for 4 days they mull it over, and they can't think of the answer. They can't come up with the answer, so they go to his wife, and they say, coax the answer out of him. And if you don't coax the answer out of him, we're going to kill you and all in your father's household. So what happens is that she goes to Samson, And she begins to grieve and mourn and beg him to provide the answer. She says, "You have told these men a riddle, but you have not given me the answer." He says, "Why would I give you the answer? I didn't even share it with my parents." And so day after day, she's begging him, she's mourning, she's being a real pain. And so what happens is that eventually he gives her the answer to shut her up. And she goes and gives the answer to these men who give the answer to Samson. He knows that his wife has betrayed him. And so what happens is the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. He goes to Ashkelon. He kills 30 men. He takes their garments and he gives it to those individuals who were his attendants. Now again, he experiences great anger at his wife. She has betrayed him. And so in his anger, he turns away from her and he goes back to his parents' household. Now, eventually his anger subsides and that he decides, "I'm going to go to my wife." He brings a goat. He goes to her house. He says, "I'm going to go in and see her." Her father says, "You will not go in and see her because she is betrothed to another." He explains, "You left this house in great anger. And I thought that because of the fact that you left this house in great anger, that you no longer had a desire for her. So I betrothed her to another man." But he wants to make peace with Samson. So he says, "I got another daughter. She's more beautiful than her, and I'll give her to you if that be your desire." But Samson is angry, and now he feels provoked. He considers himself wronged by the actions of her father and by the Philistine people. And so again, not out of personal vengeance, but being a judge in Israel, he has decided that he is going to hold them accountable for the wrongs that they have done to him and unto all Israel. Though the word shualim has been widely interpreted to mean foxes, it should probably be better understood as jackals. Samson caught 300 of these animals, and after placing them in pairs and putting a torch between them, he sent them forth to set fire to the stacked sheaves and standing grain of the Philistines, as well as their grapevines and olive trees. So he says, "All right, I've had it with these people." As the judge in Israel, he says, "I'm going to hold them accountable for the wrongs that they have done to me and to this nation." So he goes out and he catches 300 of these animals, which in Hebrew, the word is shualim. Now, most interpreters interpret it as meaning foxes, but it should probably better be understood as jackals because it's difficult to catch a fox. But we know that jackals will run in packs. Anyway, the shualim, he catches 300 of them and he pairs them up, and that he ties their tails together and he puts a torch in, between their tails, and then he lights the torch and sets them free. And they run through the fields of the Philistines. And so what happens is, as they're going along, they're setting fire to all that is there in the fields. Remember that this is the harvest season. So there are sheaves, grain that's been cut down and put into sheaves. There's also the standing grain. There's also the grapevines and the olive trees. And so what happens is that as they're running through, they are setting everything on fire. Now, when the Philistines identified the perpetrator as Samson, they killed his wife and her father. At this, Samson carried out another act of revenge by killing many Philistines, and then he went to live in the cleft of the rock at Etam, since he wanted to avoid detection of the Philistines and since he could not trust his own people. So, the Philistines, when they see that all of their grain, the sheaves, the standing grain, the grapevines, the olive trees, everything in the fields has been burned off, they're furious. And they want to know who did this. And they were told the perpetrator is Samson. So they went to the house of his wife and they killed her and her father. And when Samson hears about this, he is furious. And he decides, I'm going to carry out another act of revenge against these people. So he goes out and he attacks a group of Philistines, and he kills many of them. And then he goes to live in the cleft of a rock at Etam. He goes to this deserted spot. Why? Because he wants to avoid the detection of the Philistines. He doesn't want them to know where he is. Another thing is, he could not trust his own people. He's thinking to himself, when push comes to shove, my people will betray me and turn me over to the Philistines. When the Philistines threatened war with Judah, men from the tribe went to the place at Etam and bound him with the intent of turning him over to the Philistines. So, again, the Philistines find out that the perpetrator of all of these deaths was Samson. And they want him. And so they come and they attack Judah. And that there were those leaders of Judah, they say to the Philistines, why have you come and attacked us? Philistines say, we want Samson. We want him so that we can bring judgment upon him. Now again, as I said, Samson was hiding in the cleft of the rock at Etam because he was trying to avoid the detection of the Philistines, but also he believes that his own people will betray him and turn him in. And we see that this thought process comes to be true because the men of Judah go down to this cave there at Etam, and that they come to him and they say, what are you thinking? These people are masters, and that you have done this to them. What were you thinking? And so they said, we're going to take you back to the Philistines. That's it. And so Samson says, as long as you don't kill me yourself, I'll go with you. And so when they say they won't kill him, and he submits to them, they take 2 new ropes and they bind him and they lead him on the way to the Philistines. Now, when they brought him to the Philistines, the Spirit of God came upon Samson and he broke the ropes that bound him. At hand was the jawbone of a donkey, which he used to strike down 1,000 Philistines. As a side note, studies done by the University of Tennessee Forensic Center in the year 2011 show that the jawbone of a donkey will remain sturdy and that this used as a club can crush the temporal skull regions with one blow. So again, the men of Judah betrayed Samson. They went and they bound him and brought him to the Philistines. As they're leading him to the Philistines see Samson coming, bound in ropes, and they are rejoicing. Finally, this enemy of the Philistines is going to be turned over to them. As Samson approaches them, wrapped in these ropes, the Spirit of God comes upon him, and he snaps the ropes. And he looks, and there upon the ground is the jawbone of a donkey. He picks it up, and he uses it as a club, and he kills 1,000 of these Philistines. Now, as we know, that other books, other writings, people take that as gospel. You don't ever question these books, right? But anything in the Bible, people will question. They'll question this, they'll question this. How can this be? How can this be? Now, there were those who said King David didn't live. There's no proof outside of the scriptures that David existed. Well, guess what? They found 2 tablets, and it mentioned David, king of Israel. So David did exist. Another thing, people said there's no way that you can knock somebody out with a stone. So they went out into the desert and they found these Bedouin men. And that these men were professionals with a sling and a stone. So they got one of these radar guns and they held it out like that, and these guys went and threw it. And when they come out of the pouch, that a couple of them were over 100 miles an hour. So I guarantee you that if a man gets hit in the forehead with a rock going 100 miles an hour, he's going to be knocked unconscious. Then we see that many people said that Samson could not possibly have existed. He did exist, and then they said, even if he did exist, there's no way that you can kill somebody with the jawbone of a donkey. So as I said, in the year 2011, the University of Tennessee, their forensic center, they did a study on this to find out if you could kill somebody with the jawbone of a donkey. And they found out that the jawbone of a donkey will remain sturdy. And that if it is used as a club, and if you hit the temporal, the soft areas of the skull, that you can kill somebody with one blow. One blow of this jawbone of a donkey used as a club will crush, it will allow you to kill somebody with one blow. Amen. Now, I'm back on what we're talking about here. Further, some believe Lehi was a narrow place, thus restricting the Philistines from attacking him as a large force. However, one must remember that more than the jawbone used as a club and the physical strength of Samson, it was the Spirit of God working through this deliverer of Israel that was the source of the victory. Remember that the men of Judah brought Samson to the Philistines at this place called Lehi, and that he killed 1,000 of them with this jawbone. And that there are those scholars who say it had to be a narrow place because otherwise the Philistines would have attacked him from every direction and they would have overwhelmed him and they would have killed him. And so they use the example, I'm not sure if you know it, but there is a snake path at Masada. There is this, this long, narrow path that goes up to the top. And that we know that, a few men can hold off a large army, as they did at the beginning of the attack on Masada. The Romans said, we'll go up that snake path and take that fortress. Well, they found out it was so narrow that a few of the people up on top were able to hold off that entire legion of Romans. That's why they had to try another way of capturing the fortress. Then we also have the Sikh at Petra. Those of you who don't know that there is a narrow path that leads to the city of Petra. In some places it's so narrow that it is only 6 feet wide. And that though Petra was attacked many times, no one was able to take it successfully because it was so narrow that a handful of men could hold off a large army. So again, these scholars are saying that this place had to be narrow so that Samson was able to fight 2 or 3 of them at a time. But we missed the forest for the trees because of the fact that it is not the jawbone of the donkey and it is not the strength of Samson who has secured the victory, but it is the Spirit of the living God who came upon Samson and empowered him to kill these Philistines. Now, as if to remind this great hero of Israel of his own physical limitations, following a great victory, Samson experienced great thirst, and he cried out to God that he might provide water to quench his thirst. God answered his plea as he heard the cry of his people Kadesh, and with his thirst quenched, his strength was restored. So again, Samson has just had a great victory. He has snapped the ropes, he's used the jawbone of a donkey, and he has killed 1,000 Philistines. But after all of this exertion, he is extremely thirsty, and that he feels as if he is going to die from thirst. So he makes a cry, a plea unto God that God will provide water so that his thirst will be quenched and his strength will be restored. And that God heard him as he heard his people at Kadesh. If you don't remember the story of Kadesh, you can find this in Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 20. We know that the children of Israel, that they came to this place called Kadesh. There was no water. And that the people argued with Moses. And that Moses went to God, and God is not angry with these people. So he says, what you are to do is, you are to take your staff, and you are to take your brother Aaron and go to the rock, and then you are to call an assembly of the people, that they will come together before the rock. Then you are to speak to the rock, and the rock will bring forth his water. And everything starts out good. Moses takes his staff, he takes his brother Aaron, they go to the rock, they call for the assembly of the people. Then, after putting up with these people for 40 years, Moses had enough. And so when they assemble, he says, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring forth water for you from this rock?" Now, the reason he was to speak to the rock is to show that this water that's going to come forth is by the hand of the Lord. It's God who provides the miracle. But again, Moses in his anger strikes the rock twice, making it look to the people like he and Aaron are responsible for this miracle, the water coming forth from the rock. Now, our God is a merciful, but he's also a just God. He provides water for the people, and then he holds Moses and Aaron accountable. Because you sinned against me, now you are going to die outside of the land. So again, back on what we're talking about here, just as God heard his people and provided water for them at Kadesh, so he heard Samson, and he provided the water so that his thirst might be quenched. And that, again, with his thirst quenched, that his strength was restored. Now, I just want to make 2 or 3 more points and we'll close. God empowers Samson to defeat and destroy many Philistines, but he brought this mighty man to a place where he had to trust in the provision of the Lord. Many times we have to face challenges and obstacles, and those who have determined to oppose and seek our destruction. There will also be times when God will allow circumstances to arise so that we must look to him to remind us that our deliverance is not by our hand, but through his provision and strength. So here we see, as we've talked about in the verses today, we have talked about the fact that Samson was empowered to defeat the Philistines. He was able to defeat them, and that he was able to gain a great victory over the enemies of Israel. But yet we see that when he had done so, he was thirsty and he had to depend upon God for the provision. God is showing him, you got a great victory, but your deliverance and your victory is in me. And so we should see this in our own life, that there will be challenges and obstacles that come into our life. And that there are going to be those people who, when they find out that we are believers in Messiah, we are servants of the living God, they're going to make it their mission to oppose us and seek our destruction. And again, there will be deliverance. There will be deliverance in these times. But again, to show us that it is not by our own wisdom and strength, and I'll stop and say that there will be times in our life. There will be times such as sickness. There will be times as financial strain, troubles in your marriage, and there will be those who will look to all the other sources. There will be those who will go to doctors and get on regimens and read health books about their particular illness. And that there will be those who will get a self-help book on their finances, learning how to cut corners and how to manage their finances and whatever. There will be those that will go to marriage counselors and try to work out the problems in their marriage. But again, we see here that we have got to keep our focus on God. It is God who gives us health. It is God who removes sicknesses and restores our health. It is God who is able to restore our finances. It is God who is able to restore marriages. It is God who can meet all of our needs. When grave circumstances arise and we find ourselves in the valley of the shadow of death, we will be delivered if we trust in the power of the Lord. So sometimes people don't get it. They just don't get it. No matter how many times God tries to get your attention, he'll even grab you by the shirt trying to get your attention. And sometimes people just don't learn until there are some serious grave circumstances that arrive in their life. Sometimes it is finding themselves standing in the valley of the shadow of death. They have got some illness that is so bad and so hopeless that if it is not by the power and the healing of the Lord, they will assuredly die. Now, if people will come to their senses and they will return to God and look to Him for healing, God will meet their needs and deliver them from these grave circumstances and even bring them forth from the valley of the shadow of death. Now, in sin, we are in captivity to Satan, yet God has provided the Lamb that delivers and brings freedom. If we will return to God through the finished work of Yeshua, there is forgiveness, freedom, and cleansing. Through the transformation and empowerment of the Spirit, one is able to persevere and run the race so that in the completion of the course, there is victory, and what awaits them is an inheritance in the New Jerusalem and life and peace for all eternity. So, we've been talking about physical deliverance. We've been talking about deliverance from the physical things of this world. Now we're going to talk about deliverance in the spiritual realm. Many times people bring troubles on themselves, that they turn to liquor, they turn to pleasures of the flesh, they turn to, pleasures of this world, they turn to all manner of things, seeking, the desires of their heart. And many times this will lead them to a place of brokenness. Now, when the person finds themselves in this place of brokenness, they see where their sins have brought them. If they will come to their senses and return to God in confession of their sins through the finished work of Yeshua, they will be delivered. So again, that God saw us in our condition, our brokenness, knew that we couldn't free ourselves from our captivity to sin and death. So He sent His own Son as the Lamb. Yeshua came into the world. He left behind His power and His glory that He had in the beginning, took on human flesh, came into the world, carried out His ministry. He came into the world, and again, He carried out His ministry. And in this, He fed many, He healed many, He carried out His ministry. That at the end of the ministry, that He was rejected, arrested, placed upon the execution stake of the cross, and that He poured out His blood as a ransom. He suffered, He died, and He was taken down and laid in the tomb, but 3 days later He came forth alive and is sitting at the right hand of the Father today. And that all those, again, who will return to God through the finished work of Yeshua, they will be forgiven. They will experience freedom. The shackles of sin and death will fall off of them. Another thing, there is cleansing, as there is a fountain of cleansing that is opened up for them. Now again, also, there is the work of the Spirit that does the work of transformation in the life of the individual, changing them from the old sinful man, the old sinful woman, to a new man, a new woman, with a new heart and a desire to love the Lord. Also empowered by the Spirit to do the will of the Father, to run the race and complete the course, even in times of temptation, even times of trial and persecution, to run the race and run it through to completion. Because having completed the course, a person has the victory. And what is the victory? But it is to have an inheritance in the New Jerusalem. And in this place, the person will have, access to the city. They will live in the presence of their Creator, walking by the light of the risen Lamb. And they will experience life, joy, and peace for all eternity. That is the message. Okay.